No, I'm I'm afraid of dying generally. So, any time I bring up, like, if I'm going to need to be able to afford medical equipment when I get older, and that's why I need to work toward profit as an artist,
Okay.
then it reminds me that someday I'm going to die. Yeah.
Just a sort of a question I sort of thought about when we were talking about overhearing people's conversations. Do you think you're morally obligated to those snatches of conversation once you overhear them?
Oh, morally obligated to take on the people's conversations and turn them into a piece of art.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. You have an idea and you think, well, what happens to that idea? If I don't fulfill that idea, it's just going to go away into the sea of the universe and be lost forever in the history. And then you think of all the ideas that have been lost and all the stuff, and then the universe keeps going. It keeps going over time, and time keeps passing.
So do you think really the true artist would overhear everybody's conversations and try and use them in some way?
Yeah, and you just have to keep cracking along and be like, I have an obligation to do this. I have to have an obligation to do this. I have an obligation to do this. Just keep saying that to yourself, and just keep. You push yourself, don't you? Do you find yourself pushing yourself and to always be, or to always produce?
To always move, yeah, and to keep continuing
to produce poetry. Yeah, it's interesting.
So do you, if you just read out an overheard conversation from my notebook, do you keep a notebook in the same way as you do?
Yeah. Well, before this interview started, I wrote down the phrase Cassandra's wine, because I was sort of thinking of artists talking to artists as, and I guess I was going to ask you this. I was thinking of Cassandra, of course, who is in the Greek tragedies. She's the one that has prophetic dreams. And so, if you were to have prophetic dreams, you would probably want to drink, to keep the dreams away, because you keep them away. And so, I wrote Cassandra's wine. So, I guess I was going to ask you, and this might be a bit off the subject, is if you feel like as an artist you sometimes want to resort to alcohol to keep you kind of going. What do you think of all these artists who? I think
I'm sort of drawn to alcohol as an artist and also as a human being, really.
I'm sorry I put my pen aside because I kept snapping it.
That's okay. Yeah, I think I'm sort of drawn to alcohol. As an artist and as a human being, and I think alcohol does have its benefits, and it definitely has its non-benefits. But maybe that just thinking back to that overheard bit of conversation, maybe the purest form of profit ever invented. He was talking about alcohol. Maybe that was his.
Say the bit of the conversation again.
The purest form of profit ever invented.
The purest form of profit, and that's the only...
That's the only bit that I've got here.
So you would ask yourself, if you were to sit down and write a poem, what is the purest form? And alcohol is the purest form of profit ever invented?
I don't know, maybe you could say that.
Yeah, you could say that. Interesting. Because I think artists, kind of, generally speaking, like, you can go right down the line and say Victor Hugo, name an artist.
Jasper Johns.
Yes, or like Picasso.
Charles Fort.
Who else could you name who's an artist? Or any kind of art. Like... Funny, I can't think any art form.
William Shakespeare.
Yes. And sorry, I'm having trouble thinking about who's the, like Mary Shelley would be the author of Frankenstein.
And she was well known for dabbling in spirits.
And you go right down the line with artists, and they're all of them drinking, drugs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's
mostly both.
But I think that's an interesting question: is whether these people get drawn to art because they're already susceptible to alcohol and to drug taking, and whether art is an excuse for that. Really.
Well, yeah. So you could just want to take alcohol and drugs.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people who are into art,
as you're growing up.
Yeah, and they just say, well, what way can I continue taking drugs and being drunk? That's legitimate, and I think art is a legitimate reason for a legitimate excuse for a lot of these people.
Yeah, exactly.
For James Joyce, for example, he was heavily into drugs and drink at an early age, and he sort of was pretending almost to write this massive novel that took 20 years just as an excuse to...
Yeah, because it did take him 20 years to write that novel.
But that's because he was drunk. I mean, if he was sober,
time.
It would have probably only taken 2 or 3 years.
If he had even wanted to write the novel.
Yeah,
he
might not
probably he could have been
using
using the novel as an excuse.
I mean, yeah, and he could have been the manager of Vodafone, and we could have overheard him say that.
Mm-hmm.
The purest form of profit ever invented. That could have been James Joyce.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't have to be a novelist. It's just an excuse. If you're sitting in the bar and the person comes in and they say, "What are you doing in the bar?" You can say, "Well, I am a novelist," or "I am a sculptor."
Yeah, and I'm just.
And then they'd be like, "Oh."
Whereas if you were a postman and you were found sitting in the bar with a bag full of letters, then it'd be different, wouldn't it? You'd be like, "You're not really a post. You're supposed to be out working."
Right.
Whereas I think for a lot of people who are into art,
so it's almost a chicken or the egg sort of thing.
I think so.
Which comes first, the inclination toward art or the inclination toward drinking and drugs?
Yeah. I remember I had
if you're so inclined.
Yeah. I mean, I know that you've been drunk at some point in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that because you wanted to be a writer, and because of the people you associate with, they've persuaded you towards?
Yeah, I don't know. It goes so far back in my memory. I mean, the first time I was drunk I was probably 8 years old, and so I'm not sure what I was thinking at the time, because I was probably also reading Stephen King at the time, and saying, "Oh, you know," and I started rather early with that stuff, and
but you must have already written some letters and stuff at this time as well.
Yeah, but it was when I was reading Stephen King books that I said, "Oh, I'm going to copy these books," and so I would write my own Stephen King books.
Well, you would copy them word for word and just write them out.
Well, I'd start them and I'd maybe get halfway through the book and sort of copying. Yes, pretty much the story, but I would just be copying it back in my head and onto the computer. And so, but around that same time, and that was probably the beginnings of writing, but around that same time, of course, like the first thing that you find out about Stephen King is that he likes beer, right? And that's like in the first, if you take a Stephen King novel and you pick it up and you open it, and the first page will be about beer. Or something like that.
Or if not beer, then
there'll
his
be
characters are sort of addicted to drugs.
So then I might have also gotten the idea at that time, or maybe I saw somebody in the street having a beer or something like that, and maybe at that time I can't remember really because I was only 8 years old.